Imagine the exact same chemical in your brain that makes a mother willing to like literally die to protect her child is the very same chemical that triggers nations to go to thermonuclear war.
Yeah, it's a heavy thought.
It really is. That the biological mechanism responsible for the most, beautiful, selfless acts of human love is simultaneously the mechanism that generates our most violent xenophobia.
It's the ultimate biological paradox.
Right. So today, we are looking at a deeply uncomfortable biological truth, and we are asking a question that sits at the absolute center of, well, modern human existence.
The question of identity, really.
Exactly. Think about your own day, your own identity as you're listening to this. Is it actually possible to deeply love your hometown, your state, your country, without that love inevitably demanding that you view outsiders as a threat?
Can you be a patriot and a planetary citizen at the same time?
Yes. Does taking on a sense of global responsibility require you to somehow, dilute your local roots and abandon your patriotism?
It is arguably the ultimate question of the 21st century. I mean, historically, we've treated local loyalty and global citizenship as a zero-sum game, right?
Like, if you have one, you can't have the other.
Exactly. The assumption has always been that if you zoom out to care about the entire planet, you must, necessarily care less about the soil beneath your feet. But the material we are examining today forcefully argues the exact opposite.
Right, and the material we are examining is incredibly specific this time. Normally on this deep dive, we look at massive, sweeping texts, right? Entire books, vast economic proposals.
They're all in historical movements, yeah.
Yeah, but today we are placing a highly powered microscope over just one single explosive paragraph.
Just one.
We have in front of us a very extensive, detailed document called the Blueprint for a Peaceful World version 1.0. It's this academic manifesto dedicated to creating a civilization where systemic violence is obsolete.
Which is a massive goal.
Huge. But instead of trying to digest the whole overarching vision, our mission today is entirely focused on exactly 81 translated words.
Those 81 words make up point 20 of the manifesto, and it's titled Planetary Citizenship, but it carries a very specific, carefully chosen subtitle, which is Nested Loyalties.
Nested loyalties. It's a phrase that immediately creates a visual, which we'll certainly get into in a bit. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Because if this single paragraph is correct, not only is it possible to be both a fierce patriot and a planetary citizen, but one is actually the strict prerequisite for the other.
You cannot truly be one without the other.
Right. So where do we even begin with 81 words?
Well, the logical journey that this specific paragraph takes the reader on is what makes it so compelling. We are going to start deep in our evolutionary past, examining the raw biological and neurochemical instincts that physically divide us into rival tribes.
Brain chemistry stuff.
Exactly. From there, we have to look at the psychological and societal frameworks that allow us to basically hack those biological instincts to unite.
And that's where the nested loyalties comes in.
You got it. That concept does the heavy lifting. And finally, we will explore a profound, visceral state of consciousness that the authors refer to as ecological empathy.
Wow.
Yeah, it is essentially a complete roadmap from the Paleolithic cave to a unified, sustainable planet condensed into a single paragraph.
Okay, then let's not waste any time. The very first sentence of point 20 states that humanity must overcome the tragedy of something called parochial altruism.
Or parochial altruism.
Yeah, and the text explicitly defines this as a biological us versus them mechanism that pushes us toward war. Now, I understand altruism. We all do, right?
Sure, selflessness.
Right. It's the instinct that makes a person jump onto the subway tracks to pull a stranger out of the way of a train. It's the cornerstone of human goodness. But pairing it with the word parochial.
It seems contradictory.
Completely. Parochial implies narrow, localized, small-minded. Parochial altruism sounds like a massive contradiction in terms.
It sounds like a paradox, but it is actually one of the most crucial foundational concepts in evolutionary biology. To understand why this manifesto highlights it as a tragedy that must be overcome, we really have to look closely at how human goodness actually evolved in the first place.
Goodness is an evolutionary trait.
Exactly. Specifically, cooperation and self-sacrifice. We have this tendency in modern society to romanticize altruism as this universal angelic quality that just fell from the sky.
Like we're just naturally pure beings.
Right. But in the harsh, brutal reality of human evolution on the African savanna hundreds of thousands of years ago, universal love would have been an evolutionary dead end.
Oh, absolutely. Because if our early ancestors walked up to a rival competing tribe with open arms wanting to share their scarce food.
Just giving them a hug.
Yeah, give them a hug. They probably weren't surviving the winter, let alone passing their genes down to the next generation. The universal hugger gene gets wiped out immediately.
Right. Wiped out on day one. This is the core problem of group selection theory. How did a self-centered, survival-driven species ever develop the capacity for self-sacrifice?
Why would I ever die for you?
Exactly. Why put the group's needs above your own survival? The evolutionary answer is parochial altruism. Nature violently selected for individuals who were fiercely, beautifully, and selflessly devoted to their own small group.
Their kin, their immediate tribe.
Yes. But, and this is the critical part, that intense internal devotion evolved alongside and was fueled by a simultaneous suspicion, hostility, and aggression toward outside groups.
Wait, I want to make sure the mechanics of this are absolutely clear because it's honestly deeply unsettling.
It is.
Are you saying that the exact same biological instinct that makes a community, say, band together to fill sandbags during a catastrophic flood, is the exact same mechanism that pushes us to start wars with a neighboring country?
Yes.
It's not two different systems in the brain.
It is not two different systems. They are two sides of the exact same neurobiological coin. You protect what you love, and in a resource-scarce environment, protecting your in-group inherently means neutralizing the threat of the out-group.
I have to push back on this a little, or at least ask for the hard science behind it.
Yeah.
Because it feels, I don't know, a bit deterministic.
Like we don't have free will.
Yeah. It's easy to say evolution made us do it, but what is actually happening in the body to prove that love and hate are tethered together like that?
This raises an important question, and to answer it, let's look at the neurochemistry, specifically the hormone oxytocin.
Okay, oxytocin.
We colloquially call it the cuddle hormone or the love hormone.
Right. It's what floods a mother's brain when she nurses her newborn.
Exactly. It spikes when you hug a loved one, when you bond with friends, when you feel a deep sense of belonging to a community. It promotes deep trust, empathy, and cooperation.
It sounds great.
It does. And for a long time, science thought oxytocin was just the biochemical equivalent of pure goodness.
But I'm guessing there's a catch.
A big one. Over the last decade or so, behavioral endocrinologists like Karsten de Dro in the Netherlands conducted double-blind, placebo-controlled studies that revealed the dark side of oxytocin.
The dark side of the cuddle hormone. What did the studies show?
They found that while oxytocin administration absolutely increases love, trust, and cooperation for a person's in-group, it simultaneously increases defensive aggression, preemptive strikes, and unconscious bias against an out-group.
Wait, really? So it actively makes you more aggressive to outsiders?
Yes. It doesn't just make you universally loving, it makes you intensely tribal. It amplifies ethnocentrism.
Oh, wow.
The hormone essentially draws a circle around your people, floods you with empathy for everyone inside the circle, and heightens your threat response to anyone outside of it.
So the more I love my people, the more biologically primed my nervous system is to view your people as an existential threat.
Precisely.
The love actually fuels the paranoia.
It does. Which brings us to a really critical point about the modern world and why the blueprint for a peaceful world uses the word tragedy to describe this. For 99% of human history, this biological wiring worked perfectly.
It kept us alive.
It was an incredibly successful survival strategy. It kept our ancestors safe in a world of scarce calories and constant physical threats from rival hominid groups. But today
Today's very different.
the context has radically changed, but our neurochemistry hasn't. We are navigating the 21st century with Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology.
Yeah, we have global supply chains, artificial intelligence, and nuclear arsenals. But we are still running the tribal savanna software in our brains.
That's a great way to put it. The exact biological mechanism that kept a localized tribe of 50 hunter-gatherers safe is now the exact mechanism that could trigger global annihilation.
Because the stakes are so much higher now.
Exactly. We divide the world into us and them automatically, within milliseconds of seeing a face or hearing an accent. It is not fundamentally a moral failing, it is a biological reflex that we haven't outgrown.
But this introduces a massive friction point. I mean, I'm putting myself in the shoes of someone listening to this deep dive right now.
Sure.
If this us versus them dichotomy is hardwired into our biology, if our own hormones literally make us tribal, How on earth do we overcome it, as the Manifesto demands? We can't just mandate world peace and expect our amygdalas to comply.
No, you can't legislate hormones.
Right. We can't flip a switch and turn off 200,000 years of evolutionary history.
We can't turn it off, but we don't overcome biology by ignoring it or pretending we are purely rational beings. We overcome it by becoming intensely aware of the mechanism.
Okay, awareness.
Yeah, and then using our higher cognitive functions, specifically the prefrontal cortex, to essentially hack the system.
Hacking the biological software. I understand the concept, but what does that actually look like in the granular reality of daily life? Because, tribalism isn't just about nations going to war.
It's everywhere.
Right? Think about how often we unconsciously fall into this parochial altruism trap on a mundane Tuesday.
Oh, constantly.
You see it at the office when the sales department genuinely views the engineering department as the enemy. You see it in sports. If you wear my team's jersey, you are my brother.
Yes.
If you wear the rival jersey, I feel a genuine spike of cortisol and aggression toward you.
Sports is a perfect example of hacked tribalism.
And we absolutely see it in domestic politics, where the outgroup is no longer a foreign nation, but our own neighbors who vote differently.
It happens constantly because the tribal switch gets flipped so easily. And the danger is that modern marketing algorithms, political strategists, and social media platforms understand this neurobiology implicitly.
They know exactly how to push the buttons.
They know exactly how to push those evolutionary buttons to drive engagement. They purposefully manufacture an outgroup threat because nothing unites an in-group, and nothing drives clicks, donations, and loyalty faster than a shared enemy.
So the very first actionable step in this blueprint is simply recognizing the trap. We have to look in the mirror, catch ourselves in the moment of anger or bias, and say, I am feeling hostility toward this other group, not because they are inherently evil, but because my ancient brain is trying to protect my tribe.
I am experiencing an oxytocin-induced threat response.
Exactly. Awareness creates a microsecond gap between the stimulus and your response. And in that gap is your cognitive freedom to choose a different path.
That gap is everything.
Okay, so if we can intellectually recognize the trap of parochial altruism, where do we go next? Because the Manifesto doesn't say the solution is to stop loving your tribe.
No, it doesn't.
That's what is so counterintuitive and fascinating to me. It says our love for home and country serves as the foundation for love of the planet. It doesn't ask us to destroy the in-group.
No, it embraces it. And this is where we transition into the second major framework of the paragraph, the concept of nested loyalties. The authors are directly addressing a massive societal doubt here, one that has plagued the concept of global citizenship for decades.
Oh, let's really dig into the skeptics because their arguments are strong. A lot of people hear the term planetary citizenship or global citizen, and they recoil.
They hate it.
They really do. They view it as a fluffy, utopian fantasy for the privileged. Or worse, they view it as a genuine threat to their identity.
Right.
The classical argument goes like this. If you claim to be a citizen of the world, you are effectively a citizen of nowhere. To love everyone equally is to love no one meaningfully.
It's a very common critique.
Yet there is a deep, visceral fear that globalism requires you to dilute your love for your own homeland, water down your own cultural traditions, and abandon your specific people in favor of some vague, sterile, bureaucratic global identity.
It's a highly valid fear, and it has historical merit. Historically, certain philosophical versions of cosmopolitanism did have this detached, elitist flavor.
Like who?
Well, think back to the ancient Greek cynic Diogenes. He famously declared, "I am a citizen of the world," explicitly as a rejection of his local civic duties.
Oh, so he was opting out.
Exactly. He was saying, I am above all this local politics. Modern variations often sound like a global wanderer who has no roots, no deep attachments to any specific soil or community, just kind of floating above the messy reality of local life.
Right, the digital nomad who doesn't care about the local neighborhood.
Exactly. But point 20 introduces a profoundly different model to counter that fear. It explicitly uses the term rooted cosmopolitanism.
Rooted cosmopolitanism. The juxtaposition of those two words is striking. So the roots are not discarded, they are the point.
They are the essential prerequisite. Think about a massive oak tree. Its canopy is huge, right?
Yeah.
It breathes the exact same global atmosphere as every other tree on Earth. It interacts with massive transnational weather systems, and it provides oxygen for the whole planetary biosphere.
Okay, I see the global analogy.
But it can only engage with the globe because it has deep, complex, specific roots plunging into one very specific local patch of dirt. A tree without roots isn't a global citizen, it's just dead wood waiting to be blown over.
Wow. You can't have the global canopy without the local dirt.
Precisely.
Let me throw another analogy into the mix to make the mechanics of this even more concrete. When I first read the phrase nested loyalties in the text, my mind immediately snapped to Matryoshka dolls.
The Russian nesting dolls.
Yeah, those wooden Russian nesting dolls that fit one inside the other.
That is perhaps the most perfect visual representation of how this psychological framework is supposed to operate.
Right, so picture it in your hands as you're listening. You open up the set, and you have the tiniest, solid, painted doll in the absolute center. Let's say that core doll represents your love for your immediate family and friends.
In group.
Yes, it's dense, it's solid, it's where your oxytocin response is strongest. Then you place that tiny doll inside a slightly larger doll. Let's call that your love for your neighborhood or your local community.
And it fits perfectly.
Exactly. Then that community doll goes inside the doll of your city, then your state, then your nation. That national doll is patriotism.
And what the skeptics of globalism assume is that in order to hold the biggest doll, the planet doll, planetary citizenship, you are required to throw away all the smaller dolls inside.
Exactly. They think planetary citizenship means smashing the patriotism doll.
Which is terrifying for people.
Of course it is. But that's fundamentally not how nesting dolls work. If you open up the biggest Matryoshka doll and there is nothing inside it, it's hollow. It's fragile. It crushes easily under pressure.
Right.
The entire structure gets its structural integrity, its weight, and its value from the fact that all the smaller hyperlocal loyalties are safely and snugly contained inside it.
It's brilliant.
Nested loyalties means you do not have to throw away your local community to love the planet. The smaller dolls fit perfectly inside the larger ones. In fact, your love for the Earth is utterly hollow if it doesn't contain a fierce, protective love for your specific local home.
That is a phenomenal way to articulate it, and this aligns perfectly with the Manifesto's specific definition of patriotism. The text says, our patriotism is inclusive. It loves its own without hating the alien.
Loves its own without hating the alien.
Yeah.
That right there is the proposed antidote to the dark side of the parochial altruism we were just dissecting.
Precisely. We need to distinguish between two types of patriotism.
Okay, what's the first?
Exclusive patriotism, which often morphs into toxic nationalism. It operates on a psychological deficit model. It believes that love and loyalty are finite, scarce resources.
Like a pie, and if you get a slice, I get less.
Right. It operates on the logic that says, in order for me to prove how deeply I love my country, I have to demonstrate how much I despise yours. It requires an external enemy to justify and sustain its own internal cohesion.
It's the logic that says the only way I can prove my house is the best house on the street is by setting your house on fire.
Right. It's fundamentally destructive. But inclusive patriotism, which forms the core of rooted cosmopolitanism, operates on an abundance model.
Abundance.
Yes, it recognizes that loving your own cultural heritage, your specific language, the physical landscapes of your childhood, the traditions of your nation, that is a beautiful, deeply necessary thing. It is the soil your roots are embedded in.
The innermost Matryoshka dolls.
Exactly. But that profound love doesn't require you to denigrate someone else's roots to be valid. You can be profoundly proud of your specific nested doll while simultaneously recognizing that the person across the border is just as proud of theirs.
And the crucial realization is that both of your national dolls fit perfectly inside the exact same planetary shell.
Yes.
But let me play devil's advocate here because, conceptual models are easy when everyone is comfortable. Let's look at the harsh reality of human behavior.
Sure, let's look at it.
When resources get tight, let's say a severe drought hits a region and two neighboring countries are suddenly sharing a rapidly depleting river, we don't naturally default to inclusive patriotism. We hoard, we panic, we revert to tribalism to survive.
It's the Savannah software booting up again.
Exactly. How does this nested loyalty framework survive contact with actual localized desperation? Doesn't the Matryoshka doll shatter when people are fighting over water?
It's a vital challenge to the theory, and you are right that scarcity is the ultimate stress test for any philosophy. But history shows us that disaster doesn't always result in savage tribalism.
Really?
Yeah, if you look at sociologists like Rebecca Solnit, who wrote A Paradise Built in Hell, she documents how in the immediate aftermath of massive crises, earthquakes, bombings, floods, people actually default to intense cross-tribal mutual aid. The boundaries temporarily dissolve.
People do tend to help their neighbors in a flood, regardless of politics.
Exactly, but to answer your question regarding systemic scarcity, like a shared depleting river, inclusive patriotism frames the resource problem entirely differently. A toxic nationalist views the river as ours, and the neighbor taking water as a theft to be met with military force.
Zero-sum game.
Right. An inclusive patriot, operating with nested loyalties, understands that the river is a single ecological system. If you bomb the neighbor, you don't magically create more water, you just destroy the infrastructure needed to manage the drought together.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Inclusive patriotism isn't about singing campfire songs. It's a pragmatic realization that destroying the alien ultimately degrades your own home.
Which brings us to the fascinating philosophical anchor they use to support this pragmatic realization. The Manifesto doesn't just invent a new term, it reaches back thousands of years. It explicitly states a principle.
Yes, it asserts the principle, the whole world is one family.
And in the source material, they use the ancient term for this, right?
They do. They use the Sanskrit phrase, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam.
Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam.
Yes. It is a profound phrase found in ancient Hindu texts, most notably the Maha Upanishad.
The whole world is one family. I mean, it's beautiful, it's poetic, but what is remarkable about the inclusion of an ancient spiritual concept in a modern, hyper-rational political blueprint? I mean, usually those two worlds don't mix.
No, they usually don't. What is remarkable is that the authors are taking a spiritual, philosophical truth from an agrarian society millennia ago and repurposing it as a practical, cognitive engineering tool for the 21st century.
A cognitive engineering tool.
Remember our discussion about oxytocin and the biological in-group?
Yes, the biological boundary that decides who we protect and who we attack.
Think about how you treat your literal biological family. Even if you argue bitterly with your sibling, even if you profoundly disagree with their politics or their life choices, your fundamental baseline is that their life has inherent value.
Right. You don't solve a property dispute with your brother by launching a drone strike on his house.
Exactly. The threshold for lethal violence is incredibly high because they are family. By adopting the cognitive framework of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family, the Manifesto is attempting a massive neurological hack.
Oh, I see where you're going. We aren't trying to turn off the oxytocin tribal bonding because we can't.
We can't fight the biology.
Instead, we are trying to intentionally draw the circle of the tribe so incredibly large that the entire globe is encompassed inside it.
Precisely. You consciously expand the boundary of the in-group until there is literally no out-group left to trigger the threat response.
We are taking the Paleolithic survival software, but we are feeding it a planetary scale data set.
That is the exact mechanism. We are systematically expanding the neurological definition of us.
But again, I have to ground this. Intellectually deciding the whole world is one family sounds lovely on this deep dive, sitting in a quiet room talking into microphones.
It's easy in theory.
Right. But when you are stuck in gridlock traffic, or paying exorbitant taxes, or watching the terrifying, polarizing evening news, the world does not feel like a family.
No, it feels like a battleground.
It feels like a chaotic cage match. The brain literally cannot conceptualize 8 billion people. It's too vast, too abstract. So how do we force an ancient, localized brain to actually feel a global reality?
And that question leads us directly to the third crucial element, point 20, the overview effect.
The overview effect.
Yes, the Manifesto states that we must actively strive for a state of consciousness known as the overview effect, which they define as a cognitive shift from separation to planetary unity. To force the ancient brain to feel a global reality, we have to look at what happens when human beings literally leave the planet.
Okay, yes, let's unpack the overview effect, because this isn't mystical poetry. This is a highly documented, observable, psychological, and neurological phenomenon.
It absolutely is. The term was officially coined by the space philosopher and writer Frank White in 1987. He used it to describe the profound, permanent cognitive shift that astronauts experience when they look down at the Earth from low Earth orbit or from the surface of the Moon.
I've read transcripts from the Apollo astronauts, and it's staggering. These were not poets or monks. These were hardcore, intensely rational military test pilots.
Right, engineers and military men.
They were trained to be emotionally detached.
Oh.
But they went to space, looked out the tiny window of the command module, and completely broke down in awe. Edgar Mitchell, the lunar module pilot for Apollo 14, described experiencing an overwhelming sense of universal connectedness.
He even later identified it as Savikalpa Samadhi in the yogic tradition.
Which is wild coming from a test pilot. What is actually happening to them up there?
Think about the data their eyes are feeding their brains. From space, the arbitrary lines that define our in-groups and out-groups simply vanish. You do not see the borders that we spend trillions of dollars defending and dying over.
The lines drawn on geopolitical maps literally do not exist in physical reality.
Exactly. You don't see nations, you don't see political ideologies. What you see is a single, incredibly fragile, breathtakingly beautiful blue marble covered by a paper-thin, glowing atmosphere, floating in an infinite, hostile, dark void.
It is the ultimate, undeniable reality check.
It is, and neurologically, experiencing that scale of visual awe completely short-circuits the ego and the tribal brain. Recent neuroscience suggests that profound awe actually downregulates the default mode network in the brain.
The default mode network, what does that do exactly?
It's the network responsible for our sense of a separate self, our ego-driven anxieties, and our constant internal monologue of rumination.
So awe basically hits the mute button on the ego.
Yes. It forces a massive cognitive shift. In an instant, you realize that every human being who has ever lived, every war ever fought, every person you love and every person you hate exists together on this one tiny shared speck of dust.
It makes our violent divisions look utterly absurd.
And our shared destiny an undeniable physical law.
But here's the most fascinating friction point. What does this mean for us? Because the Manifesto is demanding that we, as an earthbound global society, achieve this exact state of consciousness.
Yeah, the text is explicit about striving for this state.
But there are 8 billion of us. We cannot all fit on a SpaceX rocket. We cannot all go to orbit to get this neurological epiphany.
No, we can't physically leave, and that is the profound challenge the Manifesto sets before us. It calls for a cognitive shift down here in the gravity well.
Right.
We have to achieve the overview effect without the physical overview. We have to use our imagination and our intellect to reach the same conclusion the astronauts reached through their eyes.
Which brings us back to the hardcore skeptics who say human unity is a myth, people are inherently selfish, borders are real because we enforce them with guns, and this planetary citizenship stuff is naive nonsense.
And they will say that loudly.
So how do we answer them without just sounding like idealists?
We answer them by pointing out a hard, physical truth. Unity isn't a political theory you have to be persuaded to agree with. It is a literal, observable, physical reality if you simply zoom out far enough.
Oh, that's a mic drop way to look at it.
The political borders are the shared fiction. The geological and atmospheric unity is the hard fact. The skeptics who believe we are fundamentally separate are actually the ones living in a manufactured, hallucinatory fantasy world of invisible lines.
Wow.
The Earth, operating as a single, indivisible, interconnected system, is the objective baseline truth of the universe.
That is a staggering perspective shift. The borders are the fiction, the unity is the fact. We aren't trying to invent unity, we are just trying to stop hallucinating the divisions.
Exactly. We just have to train our brains to perceive base reality accurately.
Okay, I want to get intensely practical here.
Yeah.
Because the goal of this discussion isn't just to marvel at high-minded concepts, it's to figure out how to integrate them into our chaotic lives.
We need actionable steps.
Right. How can you, listening to this right now, train your brain to experience an overview effect without leaving your living room? I want to propose an actionable mindset shift, our first practical exercise of this deep dive. Let's call it the overview ritual.
I like the sound of that. How do we bypass the default mode network from the couch?
It takes exactly 3 minutes a day, and it utilizes the technology we already have. You open up your laptop or your phone, and you go to a high-resolution satellite map application, like Google Earth or NASA's Worldview.
Okay.
But here's the critical first step. You must go into the settings and turn off all the human overlays. Turn off the borders, the country names, the city names, the highways. Make it a pure, unadulterated satellite image of the terrain.
Stripping away the geopolitical fiction.
Exactly. Then zoom all the way out until you can see the whole globe on your screen. For the first minute, do nothing but stare at it. Let your eyes adjust to the reality of the planet as a single floating organism.
Just observe it as an object in space.
Right. Then, for the second minute, I want you to actively trace a massive weather system. Find a swirl of white clouds forming over the ocean, and mentally follow where the wind currents are pushing it.
You can clearly see how it moves regardless of the land masses below it.
Exactly. Watch how a storm born over the Atlantic Ocean sweeps seamlessly across the invisible line of a coast, watering the agricultural forests of one nation, and then crossing another invisible line to bring snow to the mountains of a rival nation.
You are forcing your brain to process the interconnectedness visually. The borders literally can't stop the rain.
The clouds don't ask for a passport. The ocean currents don't stop at military checkpoints. And then for the third minute, I want you to slowly zoom in on your own specific location.
Bringing it back down to Earth.
Yeah. Find your Matryoshka doll. Find your continent, your city, your street, your specific roof. But as you zoom in, deliberately hold on to the feeling of the whole globe. Realize that your tiny, localized roof is just one microscopic scale on the back of this giant living creature.
Zooming out to the macro level and then zooming back in. What you are doing with that daily exercise is manually overriding the tribal brain. You are actively, deliberately rehearsing the cognitive shift from separation to unity.
Rehearsing it, yeah.
If you do that consistently, neuroplasticity dictates that you are literally rewiring your neural pathways to default to a planetary perspective rather than a parochial one.
Which bridges us perfectly to the final and undoubtedly the most challenging concept in point 20. We've moved from biology to psychology to perspective. Now we reach the visceral core.
The emotional center.
The paragraph concludes with this directive, and I'll quote it. Relying on the ethics of deep ecology, we practice ecological empathy, the ability to feel the pain of the planet as our own.
Ecological empathy. This is the crucible where the intellectual exercise of the overview effect is forced to become a deeply emotional, physical reality.
Right. But to even approach this, we first need to define the ethical framework the Manifesto relies on. Deep ecology. What exactly is the difference between deep ecology and, I suppose, shallow ecology? How do most people view environmentalism today?
The distinction is paramount. The term deep ecology was coined in 1973 by the brilliant Norwegian philosopher Arne Naess. He spent massive amounts of time high in the mountains of Norway, which heavily influenced his view of humanity's place in the world.
So what's the shallow version?
Shallow ecology, which is the paradigm that governs almost all mainstream corporate and governmental environmentalism today, is strictly anthropocentric. It is entirely human-centered.
Meaning we only care about nature because of what it does for us.
Precisely. Shallow ecology says we need to stop polluting the rivers, lower carbon emissions, and save the forests strictly so that humans have clean water to drink, safe coastal cities to live in, and enough timber to build our houses.
So shallow ecology still views nature purely as a resource. It's essentially just better resource management. We want to protect the supply chain so we can keep extracting from it indefinitely without dying.
Exactly. It assigns nature what philosophers call instrumental value. A forest is only valuable because it is an instrument that is useful to human survival or economy.
That makes sense. That's how we run the whole global economy.
But deep ecology, however, radically flips the paradigm. It argues that the natural world has intrinsic value. A forest has a fundamental right to exist, a river has a right to flow clean, and a species of beetle has a right to thrive, entirely independent of whether human beings find them useful, beautiful, or economically viable.
Wow. That completely dismantles the traditional hierarchy. So humans are the masters of the house, benevolently managing the garden. We are just one of millions of species renting a room here.
We are not situated atop an evolutionary pyramid looking down. We are a single, highly disruptive thread woven into a massive, complex, horizontal planetary web. Deep ecology demands a shift in identity, from being separate conquerors of nature to being an integrated, dependent part of nature.
Okay, intellectually I can grasp that. I agree with the philosophy. But I have to push back hard on the emotional and physical reality of what the Manifesto is demanding next.
The empathy part.
Yes. It asks us to develop ecological empathy and literally feel the pain of the planet as our own. How does a regular person commuting to work, paying a mortgage, actually feel that?
It's a huge leap.
Look, if someone steps on my dog's paw, I wince. My mirror neurons fire. I feel a phantom pain immediately in my gut. I have empathy for my dog because she is right in front of me. She's a living creature I love. But how do we develop that same physical, involuntary wince for a polluted river halfway across the world?
Or a melting glacier.
Yeah, or a burning rainforest. It feels too abstract. Our nervous systems aren't built to process the pain of a glacier.
It feels abstract because, as we discussed, our nervous systems evolved to process highly localized, immediate data. A threat in the bushes, not a threat in the ozone layer.
Right. Our brains are too small.
But remember, the entire premise of this manifesto is hacking our biology. Ecological empathy isn't about walking around in a state of constant, debilitating, paralyzing grief about everything wrong with the global biosphere. It's about cultivating a specific sensory connection and radically extending your psychological sense of self.
Extending the self. What does that actually mean in practice?
Consider the concept of extended cognition, often illustrated by a skilled carpenter working with a hammer. When a novice holds a hammer, they are hyper-aware of the heavy wooden handle in their hand. It is a separate object.
Sure, they're consciously gripping it.
But when a master carpenter is working, their brain maps the tool differently. They don't feel the hammer in their hand. Their nervous system effectively extends into the tool. They feel the head of the nail through the hammer.
The boundary of their physical body has temporarily expanded to include the tool.
Exactly. Ecological empathy works on a similar principle. It is extending your sense of self to encompass your environment. It manifests when you start seeing a local forest fire, not just as an unfortunate news story or a drop in property values, but as a physical injury to your own extended body.
That is a profound reframing. It's moving from, look at what is happening to those trees over there, to look at what is happening to us.
Exactly. You start to physically realize that the oxygen you are breathing into your lungs right now is just the local forest exhaling. The water rushing through your bloodstream was quite literally a river a few days ago.
You literally are the environment.
There is no hard, impenetrable boundary between your physical body and the biosphere. You are porous. You are the earth walking around.
I want to give the listener a concrete way to practice this, because this is where theory becomes action. How do we build this muscle of ecological empathy in our daily lives without moving to a cabin in the woods?
Right. We need practical applications.
Let's introduce our second practical exercise, the empathy wince.
How do we practice cultivating the wince?
You do it by forcing the invisible supply chain to become intensely visible. Pick up an object you use mindlessly every single day. Let's say it's a simple cheap cotton t-shirt or a single-use plastic coffee cup.
Things we barely even register holding.
Normally, we just use it, appreciate the convenience, and throw it in the wash or the trash without a second thought. But to practice the empathy wince, you hold that object and you take 60 uninterrupted seconds to mentally reverse engineer it all the way back into the earth.
Tracing the extraction.
Yes, but with deep empathy, not just economics. If it's a cotton shirt, visualize the massive sprawling field where the cotton grew. Visualize the millions of gallons of water that had to be diverted and drained from a local ecosystem, maybe drying up a river, just to irrigate that one crop.
And the soil impact?
Exactly. Visualize the chemical pesticides that seeped into the topsoil, killing the microbiome. Visualize the exhausted hands of the laborer who picked it. Visualize the heavy bunker fuel burned by the massive cargo ship that brought it across the ocean, altering the atmosphere, just so it could hang in your closet.
You are intentionally connecting your immediate, hyper-local act of consumption to the massive global planetary impact. You are making the abstract cost deeply personal.
Exactly. When you do this repeatedly, the next time you go to mindlessly throw away a shirt or click buy on 5 more cheap garments you don't actually need, you will feel a slight physical wince.
Because you see the whole chain.
You will feel the heavy weight of the extraction. You won't just see a piece of fabric. You will see a piece of the earth that was fundamentally, violently altered for your temporary convenience. That wince is not guilt. It is the birth of ecological empathy.
That is an incredibly powerful exercise. But we must include a vital caveat here. This raises an important question about mental health, eco-anxiety, and sustainability.
Yeah, because that sounds really heavy to carry around all day.
It is. The goal of developing the empathy wince is absolutely not to crush you under the agonizing weight of global guilt. If you truly deeply felt all the pain of the dying reefs, the burning forests, and the polluted oceans every single second of the day, your nervous system would collapse.
You would just break down.
You would become completely paralyzed by sadness and apathy.
Right. Eco-anxiety is a massive documented psychological crisis right now. People look at the scale of the planetary damage, they feel it, and they just burn out and shut down. They retreat into apathy because caring hurts too much.
They do, which is why the integration of all these concepts is so critical. The Manifesto isn't asking you to become a paralyzed martyr to global suffering. You don't take on the planet's pain to suffer endlessly. You take it on to awaken your inclusive patriotism, and then, crucially, you act to heal that pain locally.
And that brings us right back to the Matryoshka doll. It all loops back to nested loyalties.
Exactly. The philosophical loop closes perfectly. You use the overview effect to feel the global pain, but you apply the healing locally in your smallest nested doll.
Can you give an example of what that looks like?
Sure. You feel the wince of global deforestation in the Amazon, so you go out and organize a campaign to plant 50 native trees in your specific neighborhood. You feel the paralyzing pain of the Pacific garbage patch, so you take your kids and spend a Saturday cleaning up the plastic at your local creek.
You use the macro awareness of planetary citizenship to provide the limitless fuel for the micro-actions of your local, rooted patriotism.
That is exactly how it works.
I have to say, the architecture of this single paragraph is stunning. It really is a blueprint. Every piece relies on the other. Okay, I want to give the listener one final, highly practical exercise to tie all of this biology and philosophy together.
A third exercise.
We did the map ritual for the overview effect. We did the object tracing for the empathy wince. Now let's do a psychological exercise specifically designed to hack that parochial altruism and operationalize Vasukaiva Kutumbakam. The world is one family. Let's call this final practice expanding the family tree.
A mental mapping exercise for hacking the neurochemistry of human connection. I love it.
Exactly. Find a quiet moment today. Sit down, close your eyes, and settle your breathing. Start by visualizing the face of someone you love unconditionally. A child, a spouse, a deeply trusted friend, or a parent.
Someone who naturally triggers that bond.
Notice the actual physical sensation of warmth, safety, and fierce protection that arises in your chest when you hold their image in your mind.
You are intentionally triggering a massive, localized release of oxytocin in your brain. You are activating the core of the in-group mechanism.
Yes. Now, hold on to that exact physical sensation. Don't let the feeling fade, but consciously change the image in your mind. Take that exact same feeling of warmth and imagine projecting it outward like a ripple expanding in a pond.
Pushing the boundary.
Visualize your next-door neighbors, people you maybe only wave to, and mentally bathe them in that exact same fierce protective feeling. Then push the ripple wider. Visualize the strangers in your town, the barista who makes your coffee, the postal worker, the person you got frustrated with in traffic yesterday. Actively wrap them in that same familial warmth.
You are stretching the biological boundaries of the in-group.
Keep pushing it, even when it gets uncomfortable. Visualize the people in your entire country, specifically including the political faction you profoundly disagree with and usually view as an existential threat. Try, even for a moment, to hold that warmth for them.
That's the hardest step for most people.
And finally, push the ripple all the way to the borders of the globe. Visualize the people living in nations you've been explicitly taught by the media or history to view as enemies. Recognize that they are just nested dolls, exactly like you, loving their homes, trying to protect their kids, operating on the exact same Savannah software.
If you can hold that feeling of familial warmth for a perceived enemy, even for just 5 seconds, you have briefly, tangibly achieved planetary citizenship. You have proven to your own nervous system that parochial altruism is not a life sentence. It can be hacked.
It is entirely possible. Planetary citizenship is not a utopian fantasy for dreamers. It's a trainable cognitive skill based on hard neurobiology.
It is a profound realization that shifts the burden of peace from the institution to the individual.
So as we wrap up this intense exploration, let's look at the incredible journey we've taken through just 81 translated words of the blueprint for a peaceful world.
It's been quite a journey.
We started deep in the Paleolithic past, confronting the uncomfortable biological reality of parochial altruism, understanding how our very capacity for love was evolutionarily tethered to an us versus them hostility, fueled by the paradox of oxytocin.
We then explored how to transcend that ancient biological trap without losing our identity or our roots by building a framework of nested loyalties. We saw that through rooted cosmopolitanism, our fierce local love and inclusive patriotism actually become the sturdy, necessary inner Matryoshka dolls that support and validate our care for the entire globe.
We looked at the borderless reality of the Earth through the lens of the space program and the overview effect, realizing that human unity isn't a fragile political theory we have to invent, but an observable geological fact we simply need to recognize.
And finally, we leaned into the ethics of deep ecology, learning how to develop ecological empathy.
Right, to truly feel the wince of a wounded biosphere, and to use that global connection to drive relentless, localized healing.
It is a truly remarkable synthesis of evolutionary biology, cognitive psychology, and ancient philosophy.
And it all comes back to the individual listening right now. Because true planetary citizenship will never happen at the United Nations. It will not be legislated at global climate summits. It happens exclusively inside your own brain.
Yes.
It happens the exact millisecond you catch yourself falling into the comfortable trap of tribalism, and you make a conscious, difficult cognitive choice to stop seeing your neighbor or a stranger across the globe as an other. It happens when you look at the complex, messy reality of our society and you realize that the ultimate X-ray of our world doesn't show broken lines of geopolitical division. It shows one continuous, breathing, living system.
Zooming out to the macro level one final time, it leaves us with a highly personal, deeply challenging directive. If the ancient principle of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the whole world is one family, is not just poetry, but a necessary survival strategy for the 21st century, I want you to interrogate your own life today.
What should they ask themselves?
Who, specifically, or what group of people are you currently treating as a distant, untrusted, irredeemable stranger?
That is a heavy, necessary question to ask ourselves.
It is the only question that matters. Who have you placed firmly and comfortably in the out group? And what would happen to your reality and to the world around you if you did the hard neurological work to mentally shift them into your nested loyalty tomorrow?
What a profound thought to leave on. Thank you so much for taking this highly magnified, intensely focused deep dive with us today. It's definitive proof that sometimes the most massive world-altering paradigm shifts aren't found in sweeping policy proposals, but are hidden in the smallest, most carefully constructed paragraphs. Keep expanding your family tree, stay curious, and keep exploring.